Right, Hare Krishna. Thank you for coming back. As you know, we are now on the letter J. I thought long and hard about J. I decided to go down the path of japa. So I want to talk to you about japa a little bit. What is japa? Why do people do it? What's so special about the number 108? So J for japa is the talk today. So I thought I would start off by basically explaining the difference between japa and kirtan, because both of them involve the same words, which is the Maha Mantra, the great mantra. And so you may hear it sung, or you may have it quietly sort of mumbled or muttered, not mumbled, quietly enunciated to yourself. So the words Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. That's the Maha Mantra. And as I've mentioned before, so those are various names of the Lord, holy names and attributes of the Lord, stated over and over. Now, if one does it quietly, even silently to oneself, or just quietly and softly to oneself, using beads to maintain a count, then it's called japa. Whereas if it's sung loudly, possibly with music, then it's kirtan, and that is of course beneficial to everyone who hears it. Whereas when you're doing japa, you're doing it by yourself, so it's for your personal spiritual progress and benefit. So we have a quote here from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, verse 25, which says, of all the sacrifices, this chanting of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, is the purest representation of Krishna, of all the sacrifices. So when you sacrifice for higher purposes, this chanting, according to the Bhagavad Gita, is the purest representation. So that's why many people, as part of their sacrifice, to sacrifice some of their time and effort to the Lord, they set aside a certain time in the day, usually earlier in the day, to chant 16 rounds on their japa beads. And there's 108 beads to do a round, so that's quite a lot of rounds, which it's kind of like a vow that is made and stuck to, kind of like a little covenant between yourself, a private covenant between yourself and the Lord, that I vow to set aside this time to be with you and to chant your holy names every day. So we are told in various places, it's probably better not to make this vow and then just keep breaking it. It's probably better to choose a number that you can do and not break it. So if you make a vow between yourself and the Lord that I'm going to do 2 rounds a day, every day, and I'll never skip, then that's possibly a better starting point. And then one sticks to it and builds up that disciplined commitment, rather than being overambitious and saying, oh yes, I'm going to do 16 every day, and then just keep failing at it. So better to maybe start off realistic. One can always build up. Now why these particular words? Why, whether one says them out loud or whispers them or does them silently in the head or sings them or shouts them, why are these words, why is this mantra so valued and valuable and revered and powerful? The thing is that our souls are asleep. our souls have fallen asleep to the reality of who we are. We think we're these bodies, these names, these jobs, these careers, these occupations, these colors, these genders. That's what we think we are, but we're not, as I've said in other talks. And so the soul is asleep to that fact. And so since the soul is asleep to its true nature, it's become covered in, one could say, the dust of material existence. So it's like a very, very dusty soul. Under the dust, it's still as pure as ever it was, but it's covered in layers of dust from material life and material way of living and material way of thinking and material existence. And so maybe under all this dust, it's just gone to sleep. And so this mantra is like an alarm clock, which awakens that sleeping soul, helps it to wake up. But we don't just have to wake it up, we have to dust it off. And so it's also, I often imagine it as, each time I'm saying this mantra, it's like a little feather duster brush is doing sweep, 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 dust, brush, and it's dusting off all those contaminating layers of materialistic dust. And so for me, it's quite a nice little visual picture, if you like, of the power of what these words are doing. So for myself, I like to say I'm waking up the soul and dusting it off with these words. So it's an alarm clock and a feather duster at the same time. Now, if you ask devotees for reasons why they do japa, chanting on the beads, here are some of the rather fantastic answers that have been given. One devotee says he does it to clean off the contaminated covering that's making the soul forget. Well, I've already mentioned that one, and so we can pass by that one and go to another one. Another devotee says he does his japa as a discipline to force his mind to turn inward rather than outward, because the mind is a bit like a muscle. So there's muscles that want to turn the mind outward, to focus on outward materialistic distractions, and then there's muscles that want to turn it inward, to focus on the true self, the soul, the reality of who you are, where you came from, where you're meant to be going back to on spiritual matters. But we've over-exercised the muscles pulling the focus outward, and the mind muscle pulling the focus inward have become atrophied and very, very, very weak. So we might be able to pull our focus inwards for very short periods of time, but we can't sustain it. And so just like all exercises, you need to repeat the exercise to get the benefit. So, example, if I want to get very strong biceps, it's no good I go and pick up a weight once a week. People know that you have to do it regularly, repetitively, reliably. And so if that's the case for a mundane material muscle, then it's also the case for this mind muscle. And so in a way, we're disciplining and training the mind muscle, and we're trying to develop the mind muscle to look inward. The more we practice looking inward like that, the more we can put that regulated time aside and practice and do it repetitively and reliably, the stronger that mind muscle aspect becomes, and it gets easier to look inward instead of outward. Now, another reason given is, there's a quote in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 8, verse 5, that says, this is from Krishna, "And whoever at the time of death quits his body remembering me alone, at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt." There is no doubt. that if at the time of death, when the soul leaves the body, you're engrossed in thinking of God, then you attain the nature of God. In other words, you get your spiritual body. In other words, you're not in the material world anymore. You're in the spiritual world with God, back to Godhead. So trying to quit the body, remembering God alone, that's not easy. And that also takes practice. And so if you're chanting your japa and you're doing the chanting of the names of the Lord on such a regular, reliable, and repetitive foundation, day in and day out, then it becomes so much easier at the time of death for that inward focused mental muscle to really pull its weight and do its job, which is to help you think of the Lord at the time of death and not what you're leaving behind. So that's another reason. Another reason, another devotee said, it's a sacrifice to God as part of his devotional service. So we sacrifice to God because God is the controller, God is the creator, God is in charge, God is the owner of everything. Everything we have is on loan, and part of devotional service is to offer sacrifice to the Lord. And that doesn't necessarily mean you've got to go and build a big fire and throw things on the fire as a sacrificial fire. But there are ways of sacrificing to the Lord. Example, your time. Putting aside some of your time as part of your devotional service to the Lord. Another one mentioned to gain a happier life with less stress, less anxiety, less materialism, less negativity. So that is a very, very true, positive side branch effect of doing the japa. And spending quality alone time with God was another answer given. Now onto the beads themselves, the japa beads. There are 108. And this is a very special number. The more you read about it, the more you see, wow, this number is everywhere. This number 108. You've probably heard of the Fibonacci sequence, which is found, pretty much everywhere. The Fibonacci sequence is found in nature, in spirals of pine cones, flowers. It's even found in seashells, even things like the pyramids, even things like large bodies out in space, in astronomy, kind of obey the Fibonacci sequence. The Fibonacci sequence actually came from ancient Vedic mathematicians. I know it's named after Leonardo Fibonacci, but it was discovered before then by the Vedic mathematicians in ancient India. In this sequence, every number within the sequence is the sum of the two preceding numbers. And as I said, the descriptive power of this sequence is everywhere. So here's some examples of it. If you look at the distance between the moon and the earth, then we find that the distance moon to earth is exactly 108 times the diameter of the moon. So there the number pops up. But then if we look at the distance of the earth to the sun, earth to sun distance, that's 108 times the diameter of the sun. And if we look at the diameter of the sun itself, it's 108 times the diameter of earth. And if we look at things like the number of days in a leap year, which is 366, then we can do this mathematical technique, which I'll talk more about later. And we can see that 3 times 6 times 6, which is of the 366, 3 times 6 times 6, comes to 108. So it's even tied up in there. Now, there are many, many religions that hold this number 108 to be special and holy. And one is meant to represent God. The number 1 represents God, fullness, absoluteness, absolute truth, divine consciousness. Whereas the 0 represents emptiness or completeness. Emptiness or completeness within spiritual practice. Or one can also look at it as representing null or void. And what that means is everything on our earth is null in terms of permanence. In other words, impermanent. Not going to last. Material things don't last. Not even material universes will last. Even the physicists will agree with that. They will come into being, expand, and collapse. So 0 represents that. And the number 8 represents infinity or eternity, which is interesting because in maths, if you write the number 8 on its side, it represents infinity. So there's actual meanings to the digits in the number 108. So I'll give you some examples now of other areas where this number is popping up. It's a bit mind-boggling, really. So if we look at the fact, as I've mentioned before, that we have our gross body, but we also have a subtle body. And then we have our spiritual body. So it's like 3 layers. So the gross body dies and the subtle body continues on and takes us to our next material body. So this subtle body's got subtle nerve channels in it and chakras. Now there's exactly 108 nerve channels converging at the heart chakra, which is the seat of the soul. So that's interesting. 108 exact of these subtle nerve channels. Now if we look at the Buddhist religion, they teach that there's exactly 108 temptations which on our spiritual journey we must overcome. Exactly 108 temptations. If you look in Japan, when it's New Year, in the Buddhist temple, they do their gong 108 times exactly to ring in the new year. If you look at the Zen priests, they have their prayer beads around their waist. And if you count those, there's 108 beads around their waist. If we look at astrology, there's 12 zodiacs and 9 planets. And if you times those numbers, guess what you get? You get 108. In Chinese astrology, there's 108 stars within their astrology system. Even if you look at the human body, we find that we maintain, because we're homeothermic, we maintain a set internal body temperature. And we find that when that internal body temperature gets to 108 degrees Fahrenheit, that's when all organs start to shut down. So even that number is 108. And then if we look at going on with the body idea, if we look at a type of yoga called pranama yoga. It's a yoga where you regulate your breathing. If you become so developed in that type of yoga, because regulating your breathing requires spiritual mastery as well. It's not just a physical thing. So if we look at that kind of yoga, they tell us that if you can get down to 108 breaths a day, that's the only number of times you breathe, 108, because you've slowed down your heart rate so much, then you will get enlightenment. So even that's 108. Now the average person, since most of us are average breathers, the average person breathes 21,600 times within a 24-hour day-night cycle. And guess what half of that is? So half of those breaths are solar breaths, i.e. in the light, and the other half are lunar breaths, i.e. in the night. It comes to 108.00. So even in our breathing rate, that 108 is coming in. If we look at Stonehenge, the ancient Stonehenge in England, guess what the diameter of Stonehenge is? 108 feet. Exactly 108 feet. Look at the River Ganges. You look at the latitude and the longitude where the span of the river is. So the longitude 12 degrees, the latitude 9 degrees. What do you get if you times 12 and 9? You get 108. And the River Ganges is held to be a very sacred river. And it's tied up to the number 108. So 108 is a Harshad number, which is the definition of a Harshad number, is a number that is an integer that is divisible, so you can divide into it, divisible by the sum of its digits. Now in Sanskrit, Harshad has a meaning, and it translates to joy giver. Joy giver. So this number gives joy because this number is everywhere. In all sorts of spiritual, holy ways, this number is everywhere in the design of the universe, in the design of a seashell, in the design of a daisy flower. This number appears. In Islam, that they even use the number 108 to refer to God. The number 108 is used to refer to God. And that's very amazing. So there is something special in the 108 number of beads when one does japa. So it's not just the words that are special and the words that are transcendental and lift one above material matters. One doesn't even need to understand the words because the words are transcendental, meaning they go above mundane understanding and they connect directly to the spiritual realm. But it's not just the words that's important. The number 108 is special as well. If we link this number 108 to the Christian side of the story, the Christian All Souls Day is on November the 2nd, and the time to the 25th of December, which is the celebration of the birth of Jesus, the time span between that All Souls Day and 25th of December is 54 days. So there'll be 54 days and there'll be 54 nights, and 54 and 54 will be 108. Now if you look at the Catholic faith with the rosary, because in a very similar way it's a meditative practice, it's a private time, it's a time to remember, it's a time to connect with the Lord. Their rosary is a bit more complex than the Hare Krishna one, which is just a single loop. Theirs has got a side bit, but the most important part, the main loop called the main loop in the Catholic rosary has 54 beads. And that's exactly half of 108. So I guess if you did 2 rounds on a Catholic rosary, you'd be getting to the 108 of 1 round on a Hare Krishna rosary. And there are many religions with 108 or half of 108 or quarter of 108 as their number of beads, all linking back to that number 108. So the rosary has 54 beads, but the Sanskrit alphabet has 54 letters. And each letter has a masculine side and a feminine side. So 54 of the masculine, 54 feminine, 108 again. If we use this decimal parity technique that I think I mentioned before, Decimal parity means if you've got the number 54, then you add the 5 and the 4. You count them as just single numbers. You add the 5 and the 4 and you get 9. So if the number was 122, it would be 1 plus 2 plus 2 and you'd get 5. So that's decimal parity. So if you do the decimal parity technique on the number 54, which is the rosary bead number in the main loop, on the number 54, 5 and 4 adds to 9. And if you add in 108, the 1, the 0 and the 8, you get to 9. So you see both of them add up to 9. And I could do a whole other talk on the number 9. That the number 9 is very, very special and holy, because the number 9 represents everything, because it's the highest number one can get. I know that sounds silly, but it is, because 0 to 9 represents completeness and fullness, because with 0 to 9, all other numbers are made. If you think about it, 0 to 9, all the numbers come from there. You can make any number you want out of them. So the number 9 is representing completeness. So there you have it. The 54 and the 108, they add up to the number 9. Now, in terms of using the japa beads as a meditative tool to help one meditate upon the holy names, if you think of the rosary, they're doing a similar thing. If you look in the Bible, there are so many places where it asks us to meditate. So we've got Psalms 119, verse 14 to 16. I won't read all of it, just the middle bit. Verses 14 to 16. I will meditate on your precepts and fix my eyes on your ways. Psalm 77, verses 11 to 13. In there it says, I will ponder all your work. Ponder. That's just another word for think and meditate. I will ponder all your work and meditate on your mighty deeds. Joshua chapter 1 verse 8. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night. So we should strive to always be thinking about the Lord, pondering about the Lord, what we know about the Lord, his ways, his works, his wishes. Sometimes we can't do that. Life gets in the way and material things intrude. But we could sacrifice a portion of our day to reliably do this and to exercise that mind muscle, to turn our minds inwards instead of outwards. And that sacrifice could be part of our devotional service. So that is why the chanting on the japa beads is so important, and it is why many religions have their own versions of it. So I hope that clarifies J for japa. So next time we will do K. I can clearly think what I could do for K. It's already in my mind, but you'll have to wait and see. So yeah, thank you for coming. Hope it was useful. I enjoyed doing it. So look after yourselves. Hare Krishna, and God bless.